Greetings, fellow travelers. Welcome to the 66th level of the RPG Cave. That's a palindrome level, ladies and gentlemen. I'm one of your hosts, the level 99 human archmage, Ryan Turford, and I'm joined for the first time in a long while since the last extra level episode. We've got the level 99 gnome barbarian, Mr. Matt Sowinski. Matt, how are you doing on this lovely, lovely Wednesday evening, good sir? Again, first time on a normal episode of the RPG Cave, so thank you once again for joining me.
Of course, dude. I'm stoked to be here. You know, like the PlayStation Drive was pretty much the RPG Cave for a little while anyway, where we pretty much just talked about our love for RPGs and JRPGs. So I'm stoked to be here for real, to take over, to be, you know, a sub-in for the Bland Explosion for the time being. But I'm ready to rock, my dude. I'm excited.
Nice. And well, actually, again, you're guest one of like a 3-week, you know, guest a Rama happening on the RPG Cave, because Garrett's actually over. We talked about it in last week's episode, but Garrett's actually over in Europe right now. I saw him tweet that, you know, coffee in Europe is so much better than coffee in North America. So clearly he's having a good time. I'm expecting, you know, more good tweets from Garrett along the way. But this is also what I'm calling the Canadian invasion, where we have 3 special guests over the next 3 weeks, and they're all Canadian. Whereas, you know, normally I'm, you know, hanging out with Garrett, you know, living in San Francisco. So, you know, we're bringing that the Canuck pride here to the show this week, starting with Matt, which is exciting. So.
Woohoo! And it must be at least like a little bit nice that you're not doing the show at like midnight, because dealing with the good old PST EST fusion.
Well, actually, you know, just to let some people behind the curtain a little bit, the reason the show is actually recorded that late isn't because of Garrett. It's actually because of me. Because that's when I get home from work on Monday nights. So that's just when we record the show, and it works out well for Garrett because he's on the West Coast. But
my whole world just crumbled. I was under a different illusions. Ryan, you just cast a spell on me.
I mean, clearly. But anyways, you know, folks at home, if you want to support the show, if you like what we do, there's some awesome ways you can do it. Number one, if you're watching the live stream right meow over on youtube.com/carpoolgaming, don't forget to like the live stream. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed already. I've noticed as well, because a lot of other YouTubers, Matt, I don't know if you've noticed this by watching other people's videos, they usually like to point out, oh, you know, only 30% of my audience is subscribed that watches my videos. That's not the case for us. Like 90% of our audience is actually subscribed. So huge thank you to everyone who subscribes to the channel. But that 10% out there, if you're part of the 10%, make sure to subscribe to the channel and then click that notification bell to be notified whenever we go live with new videos like this, or whenever we do a live stream like this one. Also, if you want, if you're listening on audio feeds, don't forget to subscribe to us there. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, don't forget to rate us on those platforms. Also, if you want this show a little bit early or some exclusive content, head on over to Patreon, patreon.com/carpoolgaming. Throw a little tip in the little tip jar, and out comes content. And then last but not least, if you want an RPG Cave t-shirt like the one I'm wearing, or any of our other Carpool Gaming branded merch, you can head on over to our merch store, bit.ly/CPG merch. Well, without further ado, Matt, it's time to read from the sacred texts, because we've got a cool topic this week. So first off, you know, I bring Matt on, you know, being the PlayStation guy here at Carpool Gaming, I knew we had to do something PlayStation related, and Garrett and I did an episode a long time ago, which was our favorite, you know, RPGs on the PlayStation Vita, which I know would have also been a good topic for Matt and I to probably talk about. But since we've already done the PlayStation Vita already, combined with the fact that, you know, at the end of this year, I really feel like we're heading to the kind of the end of the PlayStation 4 generation. Like, there's going to be games on PlayStation 4 next year. We already know that. In fact, we know that there's a confirmed game for PlayStation 4 in 2024. But beyond that, you know, I would imagine, like, most people are kind of moving away from PlayStation 4. I feel like this is the best time to talk about our favorite games on the PlayStation 4. But again, I just love that, you know, your favorite franchise, Matt, Yakuza, you know, confirmed that their like a Dragon 8 is coming to PlayStation 4 in 2024. So it's just like, what are they doing?
You better believe it.
Why do we need PlayStation 4 games in 2024, Matt? It doesn't need to make sense. But
because we do.
Oh, my God. So, anyways, Matt and I, we did our usual thing that Gary usually do, where we came up with, you know, 5 games that we have from the PlayStation 4 that we're going to, you know, recommend. If we have some overlap, I actually brought extras, Matt. I actually brought 11 games in case we needed them, or just for honorable mentions and whatnot. So I feel like we're going to have a fun show. And again, this isn't, you know, exclusive RPGs on PlayStation 4, but we will talk about that a little bit later because we did get a question regarding that. But this is going to be, just any RPGs on the PlayStation 4. And also, too, I the reason I like doing episodes like this, Matt, because if someone is just picking up a PlayStation 4 today, like, this is a good list of, like, if I'm into RPGs and I'm just picking up a PlayStation 4, what are the 10 games I should grab right away? And I think that's the type of list I think we're going to try and build here. So, Matt, as the guest, I would love to hear from you first. Give me one of your 5 favorite games from the PlayStation 5 or PlayStation 4. Jeez, I'm all confused now.
I love doing lists like these. It was always one of my favorite things that we did together. And for me, I'm gonna start with an entry that I think will shock and astound people coming from me.
Yeah.
And just to give you a peek, there are 16 games on my list. And obviously,
Excellent.
I have to start with going on your PS4. I need you to go to the YouTube app and look up PS5 gameplay of Abandon from the critically acclaimed Blue Box Studios.
What?
And that is obviously no.
How even on this show you managed to bring up Abandoned, Matt? What the heck is going on here?
In all seriousness, my number one is obviously Persona 5 Royal.
Yep.
Persona 5 as a whole is one of my favorite games of all time. And Persona 5 Royal just takes everything that Persona 5 did and made it even better. I had a lot of theories and ideas of what they were going to do with the added third semester, which was one of the big draws about the game. And I was completely wrong. It deals with mental health. It deals with loss. It deals with a lot of subjects that I wasn't expecting Persona to touch on, let alone in a, Persona has its ups and downs. And I mean, they are known for like inching towards tackling, issues around social justice, like issues around acceptability and being who you are, and then almost trips over themselves a little bit. But I gotta say, with Persona 5 Royal, with the extended edition, with the third semester, they really hit home a lot of incredible themes. They deal with it well, and I love the game. The cast is fantastic. The battle system is so much fun. I don't think we could even consider talking about a list of the best RPGs of all time, let alone on PS4, without including Persona 5 Royal. And I will say it is the better version of the two. Obviously,
Yeah.
Even outside of just the added content, the quality of life stuff, and even the way that the confidants make even more of an impact, especially on battle and on roaming around the palaces. It's a fantastic game. It's one of my favorite of all time, and I think that I'm happy it's coming to more platforms finally.
Mm-hmm.
But Persona 5 Royal is easily one of the best RPGs on the PS4.
Yeah, like for the longest time, like when I thought about the best games on the PlayStation 4 and games that you could really only play on that platform, for the longest time it was Persona 5, really, until we knew it was eventually going to come to other platforms. Like, it was just a game that I associated with that platform in a lot of ways, and it was the game that one of the 2 games I spent the most time playing on PlayStation 4. Just really enjoyed both the original Persona 5, and to your point with Royal, I loved it even more playing that version again. In fact, I love that game so much that when it comes to Xbox next month, I plan on playing it again to get the full, 1,000 gamer score for it, even though I know it will take, 150 hours to do. I'm excited to go on that journey again because I love, that game so much. I love that cast of characters. And yeah, I mean, it's one of the best games of this generation, like, period, regardless of platform. So it had to be included on here because even if we weren't talking about RPGs, we were just talking about best games just on the platform in general, like, it would easily, like, it'd be a slam dunk to make that list.
100%. And something that I'd actually really like to see, even if they like retroactively added in, like, I think now would have been the time, but my hopes with, Persona 4 and Persona 3 coming, next year as well, that fast forward feature that we got in Trails from Zero, which you could hear our thoughts about over on our review. But like, I think that would mitigate a lot of people's issues with Persona, because a lot of like the intros generally can be slow. There are things, it is a long game. Like you mentioned, we've both played this game multiple times and invested literally hundreds of hours into this specific one game.
Yeah.
This is something that I want to see come to this year, because I think it would get a lot of more people in the door. But this game is just fantastic. It's so good. It's just so good. And I'm so happy it'll be readily available for everyone to enjoy. And like you said, for the longest time, it was just PlayStation. Now, finally, more people will be able to check it out.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I'm so glad that, especially, like, Switch in particular, like, I know that a lot of people that have Switch don't necessarily play games on PlayStation, but they love RPGs because of how many, great RPGs we see on Switch. So, I think it's going to be, for that audience, it's just going to give just such a breath of fresh air or like just a huge increase in the audience for this game, or just more people are going to pick it up for the first time because of, people like us talking about Persona 5 forever. So I'm so happy.
Exclusively because of us, Ryan. We are influencers. We are Persona people. So I have to ask Ryan, what's one on your list?
Well, I mean, I feel like we got to get the slam dunks out of the way, because the other slam dunk that Matt, of course, knowing me and has podcasted long enough with me, he knows this one's coming, so I have to just get it out of the way and say it. It's Final Fantasy 14. Like, it's a game, even though, again, with my list in particular, I tried to specifically pick games that were good on PlayStation 4 specifically, rather than, ones that, performed okay, but are way better on PlayStation 5. Final Fantasy 14 is still an amazing experience regardless of where you play it, whether it's on PS4 or PS5. And that's why I felt it was kind of included in here. Again, I've talked about it on other shows, or, talked, Matt's ear off about Final Fantasy 14 for years and years and years. But honestly, it's one of the best role-playing games I've ever played. It's my favorite Final Fantasy game, especially like beyond just the base game, but then all the expansions and the story it tells. It's like one of the best modern stories I've played in any video game, especially when you get to Shadowbringers and Endwalker, and how it ties into even just some of the smallest moments in A Realm Reborn or Heaven's Ward, and just the way that the writing team over there at Creative Business Unit 3 just tells the story and explores their craft. Like, I can't believe how well they tie everything together, and especially with Endwalker, how it kind of like ends the saga over the course that started with the first, like, the base game, and then over all the expansions, and the way it kind of tied everything together, and now how they're launching a new story. Like, it's amazing from top to bottom. And I love to, now that we're finally getting, single player support for all of the dungeons going forward. You don't even really have to play this game with other people if you want to anymore. You can play it with AI companions. So if you were scared off by, it being an MMO and you want to just experience the story, I think, they've done a great job of allowing players to be able to do that. So it's a game that I just wish more people played, even though I know it's like one of the most popular games out right now currently, as far as, games as service. But I still think a lot of, single player fans of story-based games just have never given it a try, because they scoff at the idea of playing an MMO for the story. But if you're going to play one, very, very, very long game for the story, Final Fantasy 14, trust me, it is worth your time. Yes, it takes about 200 to 300 hours to get through the campaign, but it is 100% worth it. So,
and I have to agree with you. Like, even for me, like, I came up on a lot of MMOs, and haven't really properly played one in quite some time until coming back to Final Fantasy 14, because I felt that itch, and I wanted to come back. And even for myself coming back, I do get anxious about playing with, playing with people online and running dungeons together. I have to say, I've ran quite a few of these dungeons with random people, and the community, by and large, I haven't encountered one toxic player. I haven't encountered one person who was rude. And as a healer, it is directly my fault sometimes when things go massively awry. And still, we wiped multiple times, and people were always like, okay, this is what you should do. Be on the lookout for this. It's a community that's fantastic, with a very generous free trial that really gives you time to figure it out if you want to continue paying for it. Because, like you mentioned, it is a giant investment. People do need, to pay for it after a certain point, not just for the content, but also the monthly subscription. But I feel like if it gets you, by the time that free trial is over, you're in for the full ride. I'm in Stormblood now, loving it. I have to agree. It was on my list as well. This is such an easy recommend to anybody who's even thought about coming back to an MMORPG, just because it's so good. Yeah. It's so good.
But yeah, and even outside of MMOs, like, if you like Final Fantasy games at all, like, this is your jam. Like, yes, it is an MMO and plays into some of the MMO tropes. But trust me, it is worth it for, if you're a fan of Final Fantasy in general. It's worth playing this game. It's amazing. But anyways, again, I think we've got the two big slam dunks out of the way, but maybe not, because Matt's going to surprise me, I think, with this next one. So go ahead, Matt. What's your next slam dunk, I guess?
So once again, shock everyone. Games that I absolutely never talk about.
Of course.
Yakuza has to be on this list. And I oscillate wildly between Like a Dragon and Yakuza 0. Like a Dragon, your more traditional RPG experience. I would still argue that all of the Yakuza games are RPGs. But both of them, I think, for different reasons, deserve to be at here. And I honestly can't pick one or the other. Yakuza 0 is a fantastic entry point into a franchise that was already at like the numbered entry 5 when 0 came out. Again, a little bit nonsensical in their numbering, but like it's one of the best ones. It tells you a lot about the characters. It feeds into the rest of them in a way that's organic and makes sense. And it's so much fun. These games are known for being wildly dramatic and heartfelt and genuinely pretty accepting of who anyone is in their narratives. And like a lot of the times there was a fantastic article that I wish I could remember where it came from, but like talking about how Yakuza being a game that is known for, again, you're playing Yakuza, you're beating the crap out of each other on the streets, for bucking toxic masculinity, for handling their stories with heart, for being just fantastic through narratives about the way that we grow and the way that we change. And Yakuza 0 is just is a fantastic entry point. Similarly, Like a Dragon takes everything that Yakuza was, made it into an April Fool's joke, and then made it a real actual game. The fact that like they showed off Like a Dragon for the first time as April Fools, being like, haha, Yakuza's turn-based now, and then they turn around, do it, and absolutely nail it, is such a testament to what that game is. And again, you don't see too many games that take a bunch of middle-aged people, a lot of people that society generally tends to outcast, and brings them into the center, makes them the main characters, and tells an incredible story about love and about acceptance. And it's a great way to get into the franchise if the combat was a turn off for you in the previous number of games. Right. Like a Dragon takes it, makes it turn-based, and it's just fantastic. I don't think that you can go wrong starting with 0 or starting with Like a Dragon. It just kind of comes down. Are you an action combat person in your RPGs, or do you like your turn-based? And I don't think you can go wrong with either one. Just fantastic games with so much heart.
Yeah. Again, I feel like when I look at Yakuza, I don't think of it as like, a slam dunk must play kind of game, because I know that there are people like me out there who just can't really get into the story for those games. Like maybe it's a little bit too silly, or it's just very talky. But at the same time, like for those that are really into this type of game, like this is your jam. And I was definitely agree with your point about, the combat maybe being a big way of helping you get into the franchise. Because I know for me with Like a Dragon, one of the things I liked the most about it was the combat. Like I liked the turn-based style because I love turn-based RPGs. And I actually think that to your point, it's one of the better turn-based RPGs. And if you like that style of combat, as long as you can get into the story, because you kind of, there are some times where you just, you're sitting for 2 hours, going through the story. As long as you get through that, then I think you're going to love this game and be really into it, like Matt says. So yeah. I'm glad I knew you were going to include it on the list as well, which is why I wasn't going to bring up, Yakuza, but I'm glad that you did, because again, I feel like you're like the perfect person to talk about those games. So
yeah, they're just wild and silly and ultimately so heartfelt. Like they're just a ton of fun. But so I think anybody deserves at least an opportunity to check them out. And like you mentioned, if they're for you, then you'll be stuck playing all of them. And if they're not, well, then at least you tried.
No, they're absolutely worth giving a try to, for sure. Because again, if you find that you get into this game, that you've got a ton more to explore with this franchise. So I definitely think it's a great, series to get into if you're into it. And then, I mean, there's still lots of support coming, because we have 3 Like a Dragon games coming in the next, year and a half. So it sounds like you guys are going to get your fill with this series. But
always more. Give me an annual, like they pretty much are annual, but fantastic. But Ryan, what's your next game?
So I got, another game that we ranted and raved about last year on a review together, Matt, as well as Sean Capri was on that review too, because Tales of Arise is my next game. It's one of those games too that I think probably runs a little bit better on PlayStation 5, but I think that the PlayStation 4 version is actually, perfectly fine for Tales of Arise. So, reinventing, a franchise that's been around forever, like the Tales series, is no easy feat, but I think Tales of Arise did it in such a fantastic way that it's impossible to ignore as one of the best RPGs on the consoles. You know, it has an amazing story with a great cast of characters. The combat is fantastic, especially because if you like, you know, combo-based fast action games, you know, stuff, because it blurs the lines between something like, you know, like it's close to something like a Bayonetta or a Devil May Cry, but then giving you like those RPG sensibilities to go along with it. Like I love the blend of that together, but also it also felt like playing a Tales game when you were playing it, because you know, you had the combo points to work with, and if you used up too many of your moves, you had to kind of wait a second. So I love the pace of combat in Tales of Horizon. Again, the story is fantastic, even though I know, you know, Sean thought that the story towards the end kind of went on a little too long. I personally loved it from the beginning to the end. So I think Tales of Arise is a very amazing action RPG, and one, if you love action RPGs, it's definitely one of the best, I think, on PlayStation 4. So had to give it a huge shout out here.
Totally agree. It was on my list as well. So I was just deleting stuff and moving stuff around as we kind of go back and forth. But I have to agree, like as a longtime Tales fan, to take again what the genre is and not, I wouldn't say turn it on its head, but almost redefine it and really take it into what new Tales should be moving forward. It's fantastic. Again, the story is a lot of fun. I would argue that part 1 of the story is better than part 2. Right. But it's a fantastic adventure. The combat's so much fun. The fact that you can play as any of the characters and enjoy your time, it's becoming, for me, who only ever played as the main character, having that availability to hop around and to really find your way through the action combat while just looking beautiful and just tons of fun. Like, those games are awesome. I actually want to give like an honorary shout out just because we're right here. So Tales of Berseria as well. Yeah. Because that's another game that I was going to mention in honorary mentions.
I was going to throw it in honorable mentions too, Matt. So I think we're both on the same page with that one. Like I love that game as well. Like that was one of my like in my top 10 from 2017, which was one of the best years in gaming this generation. So like it definitely stood up, even though it was a PlayStation 3 game originally. I still think that they did a very good job with it on PlayStation 4, and especially too when you consider the fact that it's a prequel to a game that not many people like. So the fact that they were able to turn that story around a little bit with Berseria, I think shows a lot with it. But also you brought up a good point about being able to switch your characters, because that is an underrated thing about it, where you could actually probably play the game multiple times, but then just play it with a different character and it would feel completely different. Because I think you and I had different experiences, because you played as, you know, the main character the whole time, but I played as Ridwell, the sorceress, the entire time. Like that was, you know, where I found the fun in the party, you know, casting spells and kind of, you know, keeping away from the enemies. Like that was kind of my play style. So yeah, I love the freedom that the Tales games have always allowed you to have, because that's not something that's new to the series. They've allowed you to do that with all the games, but being able to do that in this game in particular felt different, because all the characters felt very different from each other in this game to play as.
And I would argue that I think in this one, each character felt like they could be the main character, if that makes sense. They all had huge skill trees with tons of combos. They had a lot of ways that you could augment them and mess with them. Like, I feel like in previous games, yes, you can obviously use anybody you want. And Berseria, I think, again, does a good job of that. But Arise, I feel like, just takes everything that Tales was and brings it to the next level and makes it even people, you know, an entry point for even people like Sean Capri, who is new in his weebness, to fall in love with that game as a whole. I think it just nailed it. I think it's deserves completely to be on this list.
Yeah, and I remember Kevin mentioning before as well, but he mentions it again in chat here, saying that he played as Kisara the whole time, because I think he mentioned that before too, which again, she's like a sword and board character. It's completely different, you know, from someone like Alphen, even though they're both melee characters. So it's just it's interesting to look at that. But there you go, Tales of Rise. I had to include it in here because it's amazing, and go play it. But Matt, what's your third game?
My third game is one that perhaps maybe people won't expect from me genuinely this time, but I have to give a huge shout out to Disco Elysium, The Final Cut. That game is one of the best games of all time. And as someone from, like, I'm not a huge person that usually plays the more kind of, I don't know, I like strategy. I wouldn't even call it a strategy game.
It's more of a CRPG, so something like Icewind Dale or the original Baldur's Gate or Planescape Torment. That's kind of what it's like.
Thank you. Exactly. But like Disco Elysium is just such a weird trip of a game. The fact that like the first time I boot the game up, I was like, oh, I'm going to make my character super smart. I'm not going to do much physical stuff. I'm not going to worry about it. But, you know, I guttered the physical traits. You wake up in the game with a hangover and your tie is spinning on a fan. And my genius self said, just grab the tie. the fan hits the character's hand, he has a heart attack and dies because he was too weak to deal with the hangover and getting hit by the fan. And I was dying laughing. Like, I could not stop. The game just has a tone and a way of writing that I've never seen in a video game before. The fact that you can become so many different permutations of the same character, the fact that you can go down a massive like communist manifesto route, or you could be ridiculously aggressive, or you could be anywhere in between, to tell a story that can be handled in so many different ways. It's just such a fantastic and unique experience that I don't think, again, I think, you know, with upcoming Pentiment, we might see something along those same lines. Mm-hmm. But Disco Elysium is such a fantastic, unique, and special game that I think that, you know, when I heard people complaining about the PS4 port when it came out, evidently a lot of that's been fixed now, so I can happily recommend it. But it's just such a special, weird, amazing game that I think is celebrated by a lot of video game people, but is ultimately also very slept on, because again, it is a little bit different than anything else kind of around it. But I wanted to give this game a spot on the list just because, again, I feel it's ultimately very weird, very special, and just a completely unique and incredible adventure.
Nice, man. Well, I mean, speaking of, you know, sleeping on games, that's something I've done. I've never played this game. I don't own it. I've never played Disco Elysium. And I think, you know, the turnoff for me and the reason why I've never wanted to jump into it before is, you know, what we described as the type of game it is, because I've mentioned it on the show before, but I'm not into CRPGs at all. Like, that style of game is a total turnoff for me. Like, it's hard for me to get into those games at all. So I've just, you know, I've never really given it a try, but I've heard, you know, so many people like talk about how much they love that game. And I know that, you know, it's a game that a lot of people love that have played it, but you're right. It's a game that I think a lot of people just never jumped into because that genre is super niche. And I think it's definitely, I think, harder for people to give it a try, but I'm glad that you wanted to highlight it here as well, Matt, for, you know, the reasons that I talked about, because I think that it's a game, you know, worth mentioning. It's one of the highest rated games on PlayStation 4, or even just of the generation. So I think that it deserves a spot on this list, even though I just don't have a lot to say about it because I've just never played it.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'd say is that, like, again, I'm not a massive fan of the genre either. I keep wanting to like games of its ilk, and it just never really ultimately click. This one had me from the beginning. So even if your local library has it, or if you can find it for cheap, I'd recommend at least trying it, because again, you never know, it might grab you.
That's true. I mean, if it comes to PlayStation Plus Extra, Matt, I'll play it.
There you go.
That's my strategy. But there you go. And likewise, you know, with Yakuza, you know, most people will probably have it in their library already too, because it was on PlayStation Plus as well. So there you go. Well, as for me, you know, you went with, you know, a game that people don't give a lot of, you know, love to, Matt. So I feel like I'm going to respond in kind to your claim here. And the game I'm going to talk about is one of my favorite games of this generation as well. And that is 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. This came out, you know, a couple years ago, and it's a strategy RPG that's mixed with, like, it's not a visual novel, but it's kind of similar to a visual novel where you walk around, you know, very limited environments and you talk to some characters, and it's mostly trying to tell you this crazy story about, you know, time travel and mechs, and it's playing off, you know, like 80s kaiju movies and stuff like that. Like, there's a lot of nostalgia because most of the game takes place in the 1980s in Japan, with, you know, one of the main characters, you know, being super obsessed with, you know, movies like Godzilla and stuff like that. So there's a lot of references to, like, old, you know, mech anime or Godzilla or a bunch of stuff throughout the story. But the strategy RPG combat, you know, is really where the RPG-ness comes to shine with this game. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to, you control 13 main characters in the story, you know, kind of like the names kind of suggests. And each of them has a mech with different abilities, and you're trying to protect the city of Tokyo from all these, you know, invading kaiju. And that's what you're doing in the strategy RPG portion of the game. And depending on the mission, you know, sometimes you have to protect a building, or sometimes you have to wipe out like a large group of them, or there's a lot of different objectives that you have throughout the game. And I think that the combat itself is super interesting. It also has like one of the dopest combat soundtracks I've heard in any game, where they have these like crazy techno songs in there that just sound amazing. Like they just get you, like, if you want to get pumped up for the day, just go listen to some of the battle themes from 13 Sentinels. They did like an amazing job with the music. But the other striking thing about this game is the hand-drawn artwork for all of the characters and all the environments throughout the game, because this is a game from Vanillaware, so the makers of Dragon's Crown and Odin Sphere and a bunch of other games that are also like hand-drawn games in this style as well. And it's like one of the like one of the most eye-popping games visually on the platform. It looks amazing on PlayStation 4, especially if you're playing it in 4K. You get just that extra bump in visuals on the PlayStation 4 Pro. And I think it's a game that just a lot of people never jumped into because they're like 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. That sounds kind of weird. And you play as 13 different characters. So I really want to do that in a game. But trust me, it's worth it. The story in this game is incredible and one that I just don't hear enough people talking about. So I had to include it. I've talked about it on the show before with Garrett, so I'm not going to dive too into it. But man, that game is awesome.
I'm glad you brought it up because, again, similarly, it's a game that I've started like 3 times and then just ultimately get pulled away into something else before I'm really able to invest myself into it. I've played that intro, like I said, a handful of times now, but it's a game I genuinely want to go back to, and a game I think about sometimes being like, backlog. I need backlog season to be able to hop into it because, again, the game is beautiful. The narrative seems very, very interesting. And from everybody that has ever played it, they just sing its praises. So I do think I need to get back around to it because it does seem like a very, very special game.
Yeah. The only downside is, it requires a big time commitment because it is like a 50 to 60 hour game. But again, if you can get through it, the story's incredible. It really goes places. And again, I'm like chopping at the bit trying to contain myself from throwing spoilers out there. But God, that game's so good. So definitely check it out. And it is on Switch as well. So, I mean, if you're listening to this and you don't have a PlayStation 4, you can play it there as well. And the Switch version is totally fine too. But play it on like that. That's a game I associate with PlayStation 4 because it was exclusive for the longest time. And I think it's probably still the best place to play it. But Matt, what about you? What's your next game? Your 4th game, my friend?
So for me, I think we've talked about Final Fantasy already, but I think that we can't really let this list go by without talking about Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Yep.
Just a fantastic reinvention of what is a classic in many people's minds, and rightfully so, I would argue. But to take a game that, like, I still remember that E3 when we just got that little teaser of them walking and the way that the entire crowd erupted and just like the screams and then how excited people were to finally get it. What felt like 25 years later, and it actually be awesome, the combat to be slick, the game to be beautiful, and for even to what feels like taking, what was just a short segment of the original game, blowing it out, making it huge, and then making you fall in love with those characters all over again, with that story all over again, and changing things along the way that has me very interested in where it goes next. I think it's just such a fun game, and I think, again, even for a lot of people who may not be into RPGs, this might be one of the ones that will be that kind of, it might grab them and it might pull you in because a lot of people might have some sort of fond memories or have just heard about this game specifically in the Final Fantasy series. So I think Remake deserves to be mentioned. Again, it's a perfectly great place to play it on PS4. Well, I do think that, if you have a way to go on, later, just because of the intergrade stuff, of the upgrades that we get with that, I think is worth it. But if PS4 is a place that you're going to play it, I don't think you can go wrong. I think it's just a fantastic game.
My God. Yeah, we had to include it in here because if you wouldn't have brought it up, Matt, I totally would have brought it up at some point because, yeah, you're right. Like, we couldn't not talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake, despite my misgivings with the fluff with the story sometimes, or, the ending in particular. I didn't... Like, I love the prospect of the ending, but I just don't love some of the stuff you do in the ending. I am very excited to see what happens in the next chapter. I can't wait to find out more. But then also, even playing something like Crisis Core in December, Matt, and I think how that's going to maybe tie into things with part 2. Like, I'm so excited to find out what happens next as well. But yeah, I love that game as well, and especially like the music in particular, like the way they reinvented the music, especially like the Airbuster theme. Like, get out of here! Like, the Airbuster theme is just so good in Final Fantasy VII Remake, or even what they did with the Genova's song when you fight Genova towards the end of the game. Like, man, like all that stuff is so good. But
it's so good.
But yeah, great game. Also, shout out to Garrett Blaine in the chat, by the way, who's joining us live on location from Portugal, coming to watch the show.
Isn't it like 3 or 4 in the morning?
I think
Are you not exhausted, my dude?
I think it is.
But yeah, Ryan, what's your next one?
Oh man. All right. Well, my next one is actually another one that we can't. I feel like we couldn't do this list proper justice if we didn't mention this game. And since I don't know if this is Matt's final game, I'm just gonna bring it up now just to be safe. And that game It's NieR Automata from Platinum Games. It's sequel to the PlayStation 3 hit game NieR, which again I know a lot of people missed on PlayStation 3, but NieR Automata it balances a bunch of different genres, but it is technically an action RPG, but it's also a top-down shooter, and like a bunch of different genres as well. It's a platformer as well, but it tells the story of of Earth being kind of destroyed, this post-apocalyptic world that's kind of ruled by robots, but humanity's trying to take back the surface by building cybernetic organisms to take back the planet. But one of the things I loved about NieR Automata was the way it handled its multiple endings, because in most games, when you see multiple endings come up, you're like, oh, that's like a nice bonus thing I could do for New Game Plus if I want to see maybe the story just end a little bit differently. But the way this game handles multiple endings is like, as you finish the game, it then starts over again at the beginning, but you're usually playing as a different character, and then it gives you a different ending, but the story still continues, but from their point of view. And I just love the way that they tell the story in NieR Automata in that way. It's so fresh and different from every other RPG that's kind of out there. And even still, like I'm surprised we haven't really seen more people try and do this idea or take this idea and kind of run with it in their own way. But NieR Automata, fantastic game. I'm also saving my conversation about this a little bit because we might be talking about this game in 2 weeks' time with another special guest. Wink, wink. But I love this game. I think it's awesome, and especially too. I love the Platinum Games is fast action style of gameplay, and it's on point with this game. The combat's so fluid and fun to play with NieR Automata that it's definitely a treat.
Yeah, it was not going to be my last game, so I'm glad you brought it up. I've tried to get into this game, and it just didn't click with me. I've tried multiple times across multiple platforms, and it just never really jived with me. I can appreciate it for what it is. I recognize I do like the fact how much it changes up its gameplay and how much it kind of does its best to reinvent the wheel constantly, but it just didn't ultimately click with me. So I'm glad you brought it up, because I know there's a lot of people with a lot of love for this game.
Yeah, I know we would be getting angry comments in the comment section if we didn't include this game on one of our lists somewhere. So It's definitely like one of those games too, where if you've got a PlayStation 4 for the first time and you want a really good action RPG, and you don't want to try Tales, because I think that's probably still the best one, NieR Automata is right there. Like, it's probably that's probably the best gateway for those people who like action games but don't necessarily love RPGs. Like, I think that's like the gateway drug for a lot of people to these types of games. But Matt, give us your final game before we get into honorable mentions, of course, because we got to hear the 13 other games on Matt's list.
They're all abandoned. I couldn't end my list without bringing up a game that I think has maybe fallen off the list a little bit, but I think for a lot of people it deserves to be there, and myself included. But The Witcher 3, The Wild Hunt. I'm not a massive fan of the first two Witcher games. I've never really checked them out. The Witcher 3, there was just so much hype around it, and I completely lost myself in that game, in the expansions that followed. It really was CD Projekt Red's golden hour for them before they kind of shot themselves in the foot. But that game is fantastic. Especially, I would argue the first half. I think the second half gets a little too bloated, but it's just so much fun. I love the combat, the world, the mission design, especially, and the side quests, and how important everything you do feels, regardless of how important it is to the overall plot. They really nailed making each decision that you make feel like it's important and have repercussions in at least a little side quest that you're in. It's a game that was widely celebrated, and I think deservedly so. And I think the expansions, again, just kind of really nailed down how special that game specifically is. Again, action RPG, the combat's really good. It has a bit of zaniness with this horse mechanics and everything else, but I think it's again a game that I think deserves to be celebrated, and it's just a lot of fun. And I genuinely am excited to possibly check out the next gen patch that will be coming along, because again, I know for a lot of people this was one of their favorite games of the last generation, and I think that's deservedly so.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was one of like the two shining beacons from from 2015. It was that and Metal Gear Solid 5. Those were like the big games from that year that people loved. But yeah, it's a game that, I'm very glad that you brought up, because I probably wasn't going to bring this up outside of honorable mentions, and Garrett might have, flown back from Portugal to throw something at us if we didn't at least mention The Witcher, because I know he's, again, a huge fan of this game as well. So I'm glad we talked about it a little bit. I personally played it for 40 hours. I liked it, but then I kind of fell off and just never went back to it because I just didn't really care anymore.
I don't think we could say that sentence with any other game genre possible. Yeah, I played it for 40 hours and fell off, because how many people who are big JRPG and RPG fans will do the same thing? They're like, yeah, I spent 20 hours with it. It didn't click.
Yeah.
It's just, what a unique problem to have.
Oh, I know. It's just like, well, and to be fair, it wasn't even a didn't click thing. It's kind of what you talked about with one of the games we were talking about earlier, where, you played it for a while and then you just fell off and you never went back to it. So it's not that I didn't like what I played. I really enjoyed what I played, but it's just, with that game, and it's one of those games where I think if you don't play it for a long time, it's hard to go back to, I think. Yeah. So, or it's hard to pick up the pieces, especially when you've got like a bajillion quest markers everywhere and you're like, wait, how do I do any of this? So
yeah, fair. It's a fair point. What's your last game, Ryan?
Well, and that's my last game that I wanted to talk about is actually also a remake. I've talked about this one on the show before, so this shouldn't be any surprise to people. But it's another Square Enix joint, and that is Trials of Mana. This is a remake of Seiken Densetsu 3, which was a Super Famicom game that only came out in Japan and never came out in North America until like they ended up officially doing an English translation for it when they released that version on Switch in the Collection of Mana. But the Trials of Mana remake was a game that I thought could have gone horribly, horribly wrong, because at that time that it came out, the track record for Square Enix remakes of games was not very good. In fact, it was pretty poor, and I was expecting them to kind of, muck it up in some way. But no, this game was awesome. Like it felt like I was playing the Super Nintendo game, but in 3D, where, it was two sides of the same coin when you compare it between that and Final Fantasy VII Remake, because Final Fantasy VII Remake, took the core story of Final Fantasy VII, but then, changed it a whole bunch and also totally changed the way it played, versus what they did with Trials of Mana, where it's a super faithful remake to the original game, to the point where it actually just feels like you're playing the original game, to the point where if you look at the mini-map in the game, it's just the overhead screen from the Super Nintendo game that you actually go on, combined with the fact that you can go in the menu, and if you don't like the modern music that they did for it, you can play with the original music if you want to. So you can be playing a modern RPG jamming out to Super Nintendo tunes, which, by the way, the music in the original game is incredible. So that's actually the route I went with, even though the modern orchestrated versions are good too. But the Super Nintendo classic music is still really holds up today. But Trials of Mana was a super fun action RPG that I just really, really enjoyed. And again, it was one where, you pick 3 characters out of 6 to choose from at the beginning. And depending on which of the 3 characters you select, it'll then have you go through one of 3 paths through the story. So then it gives you the replay value of, replaying the game 3 different times to have 3 very different, outcomes towards the end of the game. Which of course was, present in the Super Nintendo version, but I love how they translated here with the new version of the game. And then they gave you also this extra dungeon, and story that happens in this kind of epilogue, after the main game ends as well. So you can experience more of the story, that's exclusive to this remake version as well. So Trials of Mana is a game that I really, really loved and enjoyed on PlayStation 4. And again, it exists on Switch, but the PlayStation 4 version is just way better. It runs at 60 frames per second. It looks gorgeous, especially in 4K on PlayStation 4 Pro. And I think it's a fantastic remake from Square Enix. Again, like between this and Final Fantasy VII Remake, like that's Square Enix basically showing like how you do remakes right. And the fact that they both came out in the same year just still surprises the heck out of me at this point.
Yeah, I've never played any of the Mana games. I don't really have too much to contribute here, but I'm glad that you enjoy it. I was surprised, honestly. I have no massive affiliation for these games, but I might have to check this one out, Ryan.
Nice.
You may have convinced me on it.
It's on PlayStation Plus Extra tier as well. So if you got extra tier, you can go right there and go play it right now. It's really, really good. But there you go. So that's all for our normal list, our top 10. We built out, I think, a pretty good top 10 list for anyone to just jump in on, I think, if they want to get into PlayStation 4 games. But I think we should get into honorable mentions. So I want to hear more from what you have on your list, Matt.
Yeah, so I'm kind of just gonna fly through these, and there's no real massive reason why any of these didn't end up in like my top 5
Yeah.
themselves, but just some of them came out on different platforms first, and then ended up coming over.
Well, likewise, we have to pair that in the list of a massive amount of RPGs on PlayStation 4 to 5, right? So
100%. Dragon Quest 11 is fantastic. My first Dragon Quest game made me fall in love with it, and just a really, really cool post game that I didn't expect. Monster Hunter World is just a blast, and again, my first Monster Hunter, and immediately sucked me in. I spent a lot of time in that game. Child of Light, I think, is a really special and unique experience, especially coming from Ubisoft. The smaller, tight, beautiful, beautiful experience, I think, deserves to be mentioned. Middle Earth: Shadow of Mordor is just a ton of fun. I think, again, the Nemesis system coming in, and I still think it's a crime that we haven't seen that all across the industry ever since it happened.
Well, I think it's trademarked. They trademarked the Nemesis system, so they can't.
They did. So that's what I mean. Crimes. I also want to give a shout out to the Danganronpa, just because, again, I think if you've never played it on the Vita, where I know you and I did, playing it on the PlayStation 4 is a fantastic way to go. Those games are so special and they're so much fun. Similarly with Steins Gate, again, just a fantastic RPG. It skews a little bit more to the visual novel side, but I still think it's worth mentioning. And then I want to bring up Trails of Cold Steel 3 and 4. These games would have been on my list if it wasn't for the fact that Trails of Cold Steel Kai and Trails of Cold Steel 2 Kai, which were the re-releases that brought the games to PS4, never made their way stateside. Those games got stuck in Japan. And I don't recommend jumping in at 3 or 4 as a way to, enter the franchise. So if you have a way to play those games and then eventually come around for 3 and 4, 100% the games are fantastic. We just talked extensively about Zero and how special this series is, so I won't go into it too much. And I think we would be remiss not to mention FromSoft as a whole, just because I know there's a very good reason why things like Bloodborne and Elden Ring didn't make it on our list. It's just because you and I are not massive FromSoft people, and I don't think that's...
Well, it's not just that, too. Like, I looked at it from the perspective of, how Elden Ring performs on PlayStation 4. True. It's just, I think it's a way better experience on PlayStation 5. And likewise, Bloodborne as well as a type of game that even people debate if that's even an RPG. So I don't know if that even falls into the camp in the same way that maybe Dark Souls 3 is probably the best one on PlayStation 4. But
yeah, so I just want to bring those up because I know we would get a lot of hate if we didn't at least call upon the fact they're just not games for you and I. Yeah. We respect what they are, but those are kind of my honorable mentions, and obviously once again Abandoned. Ryan, what are your honorable mentions?
Of course, Abandoned. Well, as for me, one of the ones that I actually was very close to talking about, but just miss the cut. Was actually a first-party game, and that's Horizon Zero Dawn from Sony and Guerrilla. I mean, I love Aloy as a character, and I love the first game in particular. I know it's hit or miss with some people, but I like that one more actually than its sequel, Forbidden West. So I actually really like Zero Dawn a lot. It was a game I played a ton of on PlayStation 4, and it's definitely worth a pickup. Odin Sphere Liftrauser or Leftrauser, or however you say it. It's some weird German word, and I don't know how to pronounce it correctly, but it's a remake of the PlayStation 2 game that no one played, and no one really played the remake either except me and a couple other people, but it's a fantastic remake, again from Vanillaware. Just a really solid action RPG, so definitely had to include that in honorable mentions. The Outer Worlds, from Obsidian, probably, the only time we'll get this series on PlayStation, but this first entry was a really great, Fallout in space. Like, I really loved what they did with this game, and, with some great characters and great writing there, so I had to include that. Indivisible, which is an indie game from the makers of Skullgirls. It's kind of an ode to the Valkyrie Profile games, so you have, like, multiple characters that you're controlling with the face buttons, and it's just a really good, like, Metroidvania crossed with a turn-based RPG, if that makes any sense at all. But it was super fun. Valkyria Chronicles 4 was, the next in the long-running series from the PlayStation 3. Great strategy RPG on the console, and just really enjoyed it. Sakura Wars, which was like the reboot from Sega of the Sega Saturn series that hasn't been around forever, that most of the entries did not come out in North America in. But I really enjoyed this remake. Also, again, in 2020, like 2020 for RPGs was just a really good year. And then my last one, which I have to give a shout out to because Garrett's in the chat, Transistor on PlayStation 4.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, from Supergiant Games. Oh, that game's so good, especially with, I love the way that it, incorporates music into its gameplay because you play as a singer, and the soundtrack in the game is so good. The visual style, even though it came out back in 2014, still looks amazing today. Like, that game's awesome as well. So had to include it. Matt, go ahead.
I forgot too. I want to bring up very quickly Gravity Rush and Gravity Rush 2. I think both are fantastic games, often overlooked. Again, played the first one on the Vita. Just such a blast. I love Cat. Those games are awesome. And of course, one of the best monster catching, Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth and its sequel Hacker's Memory. Again, I know those are more niche on terms of, that's why I didn't include them in kind of my top 5 list. But they're both fantastic, creature catching JRPGs with really fun stories and just a wild ride. They're great times. And I think if anybody is looking for a bit of a more mature take on Pokemon, Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth and Hacker's Memory, and you can get them both in a bundle. Fantastic games.
Nice. I also believe they're on PlayStation Plus Extra as well. There you go.
There you go.
In fact, actually, I think like half the games we talked about today are on Extra tier. So you have lots of RPGs to go play probably now if you haven't played a lot of these. But anyways, let's hear from some of the listeners, Matt, because we asked the listeners as well over on the Discordia, what some of your favorite PlayStation 4 RPGs are. So huge shout out to everyone who submitted their entries. We're going to start with ngachacha, who says, I think we can all agree that NieR Automata was the greatest AAA RPG from the PlayStation 4 generation. And let's be honest, just one of the greatest games of all time. But what I want to know is, what are some of your favorite indie RPGs from the PlayStation 4 generation? I'm personally a fan of the Voice of Cards games, which is interesting, which also from Yoko Taro as well, the NieR Automata creator, which is just funny to think about. But yeah, as far as indie RPGs, Indivisible, Transistor, those are two of my favorites. I included them there. Cosmic Star Heroine, I talked about on a previous episode as well, from Zeboyd Games. I really love their ode to Phantasy Star and Lunar and other Sega CD RPGs with that one. So those are the 3 I would probably pick as far as indie RPGs. But again, Garrett and I actually did a whole 2-episode series about our favorite indie RPGs, and a lot of them are actually on PlayStation 4. So go back and listen to that. But Matt, what about you? Again, I think you definitely play more indie games than I do. So do you have any other indie RPGs that we haven't talked about here to include?
Yeah, I mentioned Child of Light, but I think I mean, obviously Undertale is a massive one that is on PS4. I think we'd be remiss not to bring that up. And massive fan of Transistor as well. That game is absolutely beautiful. And I'm struggling to think of any more. I've probably played many more, but those are nothing else is really jumping out at me right now.
Yeah. And I mean, even then, I'm hesitant even to call something like Child of Light a indie RPG because it is from Ubisoft. But, I let Garrett get away with it, so I'm going to let you get away with it, Matt. So it's all good. Well, next up, Blaze Knight in the Discord says, while I didn't play any of them on PlayStation 4, some of my favorites to grace the system have been Valkyria Chronicles 4, easily one of my favorite games of all time, Mass Effect Legendary Edition, taking the top shooter and RPG in one fell swoop, Elden Ring, he apparently didn't finish it, but it's a fantastic gameplay experience, and the Remake Squad begins with Collection of Mana, Trials of Mana, Legend of Mana, Chrono Cross, and Final Fantasy X/10-2. Long live Blitzball, and that's just Blaze Knight, of course, jabbing at the fact that he knows that Garrett and I do not like Final Fantasy X or Blitzball. So there you go. But he also had a question as well. What are some of the best PS4 exclusive RPGs that we should check out? So the thing is, this question would have been a lot easier if we did this, a year ago, because so many of the exclusive RPGs that were, the best RPGs on the console have migrated to other consoles at this point. So I think it's actually harder to put a list like that together. But I still think, going back to some of the ones that I picked out that are exclusive, that would be Sakura Wars is exclusive to PlayStation 4, and it's really good, as I mentioned. Transistor, again, from Supergiant Games, really, really, really solid. And then Odin Sphere is also exclusive to PlayStation 4. And then Horizon Zero Dawn. Also, I think a couple of these games are also on PC, but if I'm going just console exclusive, according to the question, that's kind of how I'd file them under there. But otherwise, they weren't. It was I was struggling to find, because I saw this question ahead of time, so I was trying to prepare for it ahead of time. But I was struggling to find ones that are still exclusive to PlayStation 4 that haven't gone to the Switch at some point, because most of them actually come to Switch at some point. That I would file under here. But Matt, what about you? Is there any we missed, do you think?
I just brought it up with Gravity Rush.
Yeah.
I technically, Vita, but again, just a fantastic JRPGs that are just a ton of fun with awesome characters and a lot of heart.
Exactly. I mean, they've got those motion controls down on pad as well in that comic book style. I love the way it tells its story in Gravity Rush. It's so good. But next up, we got the Muffin Mon, aka Kevin Ainsworth, who says, "I think we all know what the best PS4 RPG is, and it's Persona 5 Royal. My question, though, is what is your most underrated JRPG from the PlayStation 4 generation? The game that you feel didn't get nearly enough credit?" And I talked about this in honorable mentions, but my answer to this one, 110%, is Odin Sphere on PlayStation 4. That remake was so gosh darn good, and nobody but me played it. It was, and I mean, it's like me and Megan Sullivan on Twitter are the two people I know who played that game, and it's a crime that it just did not just sell more, or people didn't play it, or people don't revere it as like one of the best games on this console, because it certainly is. It's one of, the best playing games on the console. And yes, I know it's a PS2 game, but I think they did so much to improve the experience with the PS4 version that it really feels like it's its own game on PlayStation 4. So I have to say that. But Matt, what do you think about this question?
Trails. I still stick with Trails, and I understand that it's a bit of it's a big buy-in, but Cold Steel 3 is a fantastic game. It's a ton of fun, especially for a lot of people who want to dive in. I haven't gone into 4 yet. I own it. I just haven't actually started yet. I want to get through, Crossbell properly before I go into 4. But yeah, I think it's a fantastic series finally coming to 3 and coming to PS4 with Trails of Cold Steel 3. The game looked better, it ran better. It's just, again, those games are just such a blast. There's such a unique telling of these types of stories, and I just think they're criminally slept on.
Yeah, for sure. Well, next up we got Skycatcher Gaming, who says, "My favorite RPG on the PlayStation 4 generation is a JRPG. It's Ys 8, the Lacrimosa of Dana. Though I played it on Switch, which I regret because of the Joy-Cons, I swore that I would replay it once again on PlayStation 5. And again, that's another one that I know people love, but I haven't played it, so I haven't gone into it. And same with Ys 9. I've also heard people love, Ys 9, Moxstrom Nox as well. Apparently that game is really awesome as well. But then Skycatcher Gaming also has a question for us, and that question is, what is your favorite and least favorite developer/publisher during the PlayStation 4 generation? Me, personally, I would have to say Square Enix for both. So most disappointing, but also the best. That's so fitting. That's so fitting. For me, since I've had time to think about this question, I think the one that is my favorite from the generation, believe it or not, is Sega, because of, because the fact that they own Atlas, and, how many great games we got from Atlas between Persona and Odin Sphere and 13 Sentinels, combined with the fact that we also got Sakura Wars and Valkyria Chronicles from Sega. I think they did a lot of good in that generation. And I mean, Square Enix is definitely up there. Like they had no shortage of games too in the PlayStation 4 generation. But for me personally, honestly, I'm going to give the bill to Sega. And I never thought I'd see that as them being like the top, RPG developer in a console generation. Most disappointing, though, I would have to say, is just Sony themselves. Honestly, I wish Sony would just develop more into RPGs. Like we saw them do an amazing job with the Horizon series, and they haven't done any other RPGs since. Like at this point, like I wish that we got, games like Legend of Dragoon coming back, or Wild Arms, or any of the other myriad of first-party RPGs that we can see from Sony, or even them just taking a chance on like on a first-party, just new IP RPG. Like I wish we would see more from Sony first-party as to, them, which is why they're probably the most disappointing for me personally. But Matt, what do you think about this question?
For me, I have to say my favorite is RGG Studios. Obviously, the developers of Yakuza and Like a Dragon. I still think that Persona is my favorite series of all time, but I just think that the number of quality games that we get out of that studio is fantastic. Judgment and Lost Judgment both are spectacular games. And just the fact that they went back to the well, took Yakuza 0 and made it one of the best games of that entire franchise, and one of my favorite games. It's just really, really awesome. And I think that they're one studio that I would not get mad about annualized releases, just because, again, telling me more zany stories in that world, I can't get enough. In terms of the most disappointing, it's an obvious one. Capcom. Because it took them this long to bring back Mega Man Battle Network, when it's finally happening now. Yes, I'm excited about it, but it's a crime that it took this long for it to happen. It should have happened a long time ago. and it should have been on the PS4. Capcom.
Yeah, they could. I mean, honestly, I would have loved to see more RPGs from Capcom in this generation as well, because we also really from them we just had Monster Hunter World on PlayStation 4, and that was it from Capcom as far as RPGs in this era. So yeah, there you go. I think that's a good example. So clearly, From Software is definitely our answer for both. That's how we're gonna say. Or Blue Box Studios was the most disappointing RPG developer of the year. But anyways,
they were not.
They were something. But anyways, Matt, we got to go. But first of all, thank you so much again for filling in for Garrett, while he's on his European vacation in Portugal. But again, where can people find you on the internet, my friend?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me. I love talking RPGs with you. Happy to come back anytime you need me. As for where you can find me over on Twitter at burnout_Matt. And you can also find me at youtube.com/burnoutbrighter.
Very nice, my friend.
And obviously, one more thing. On the PlayStation Drive here on Carpool Gaming, which will be live on Friday. Come hang out with me in court as we talk about more things RPG, because I'm never going to shut up.
It's like
now that RGG Studios
it's like Court was in the chat to remind you that the PlayStation Drive is in fact a show that actually exists, that you're on. To go look at. Apparently, Court says he's played all the RPGs, by the way, just so you know. But
yeah, and he's also said he's falling asleep, so that's 2 for 2.
There's that as well. As for me, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. And as Matt kind of alluded to, I forgot to promote this as well, but on Friday, Carpool Gaming Day returns. We were having kind of an AMA with our new host for the Nintendo Drive, Luckleth and Seth. We're officially joining the team over at Carpool Gaming. And you might actually see some of them, maybe, especially Seth, maybe, be on the show at some point. So look out for that in the future. But if you want to learn more about our new additions to the team, come hang out with us on Friday, noon Eastern Daylight Time over at youtube.com/carpoolgaming. Likewise, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. You can also find us on Twitter at Carpool Gaming if you want to follow us there, or on podcast services around the globe. So for Matt Sowinski, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been the 66th level of the RPG Cave, and we're out. Bye-bye.